Welcome to Nasdaq TradeTalks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, a regulatory landscape, and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me this afternoon, we have Atticus Tysen, CISO and CIO of Nasdaq-listed Intuit, as well as Brehm, chairman of Spectral Capital. We're here to discuss how erosion of trust could have far-reaching consequences, including the spread of misinformation, reputational damage, and loss of confidence for institutions and businesses. Gentlemen, it is great to have the both of you with us, and certainly a timely conversation. Atticus, I'd love to start with you. Let's talk about the rise of deepfakes and the blurring of reality, because the good actors and the bad actors, they're leveraging a lot of the same technology.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right to talk about the erosion of trust, because that's what's really going to happen. We won't really know whether something is coming from a good and trusted source or whether it's from the threat actors. And both of us, the good side and the threat side, are using the same technologies, trying to evolve and make these deep fakes even more and more real. And it won't only be an erosion of trust in like institutions, but also just in each other. We won't even know if it's really if it's really my mother calling me or not. It's hard to really know that.
Yeah, it certainly is. And Sean, this is something that you and I have discussed before when we think about deepfakes and the erosion of trust, almost as an arms race, if you will, that classic computing, it's not, it's not being set up for the win here.
No, it's not. I mean, when you think about it right now, even the remedies that we're seeing out there are highly reactive. So whether you're thinking about trying to create AI detectors, or you're trying to do, digital watermarking or fact checking is like, we've seen how that works on social media. And then you got these centralized security systems today. So it's a real tough response time right now when it comes to these deep fake technologies.
Yeah, and it certainly can. And Atticus, you had made the point before where you might not even be able to determine if it's your mother on the phone. And we were talking in jest before, who's to say that we're not, an AI powered person here, right?
Right.
It just has implications from the top down, and the technology behind the deepfakes. Tell us more about that, because sometimes we use this, the term AI so broadly, but there are, multiple different verticals of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the most interesting are the generative adversarial networks, where they're basically using two AIs to try to improve and make these deepfakes undetectable. And as Sean mentioned, it's becoming nearly impossible for humans or even some of the current technology to detect these. And so one of the things we really have to do collectively is train ourselves, train our workforces, train our customers, not to fall for these things. And then as quantum and other things come along that will help, that'll make it better, but we can't wait for that.
Yeah, and I would agree with you there, Atticus, but to put a finer point on it, when you quantify the financial impact, right, reputational impact, and that's an intangible cost. It can be somewhat arbitrary. Is there any way to put a quantifiable amount on, what the financial impact could be?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's one stat that I was found recently. Deloitte Center for Financial Services did a study, and they're predicting that the losses from fraud alone could go up to 40 billion in 2027 from 12.3 billion in 2023. And that's all driven by the deepfakes and AI. And one of the things about AI and deepfakes and fraud is what we're not really seeing yet are a lot of new vectors. It's kind of the same vectors, trying to do social engineering, trying to get you to click on links in really compelling emails. It's the same kind of vectors, but it just at scale, and it's more and more convincing and getting harder for humans to detect.
Yeah, and Sean, what's concerning to me is, besides market manipulation and impersonation, which of course, those are two big concerns to have, when you think about infiltrating networks and the manipulation of data, to me that
Yeah.
seems pretty concerning. So where does quantum cryptography fit into this equation here?
Well, I think there's a couple things you need to look at first in the quantum side of the house, and they really have their origins in good old fashioned how to solve problems, which is you're starting to look at how do we put mechanisms of governance and lineage and pedigree and provenance inside the data. And when you get into quantum computing, even today, you can start leveraging concepts like, not only just a decentralized environment, but you think about Sphinx Plus. I mean, my associate here knows all about Sphinx Plus. And you look at this, now all of a sudden, it's been recommended by NIST, and so you can start applying this cryptographic hash mechanism that can provide integrity, and it can prevent tampering. So in other words, now you can start cryptographically hashing every single frame so that if it doesn't exist, it makes it almost impossible for the bad guys to try and go ahead and pass it off as real. So I think there's some short-term gains, things we've talked about before in the past, Jill, is, hey, everybody start looking at post-quantum security today.
Right. And that's an excellent segue, Atticus, into the question that I want to ask you. Is there anything that we can do perhaps today with the technologies that are available when we're thinking about strategies and technologies when it comes to prevention, detection, and response should there be an incident?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things we could do. I mean, one of the simplest things all the companies should be doing, if they're not already, is adopting TLS 1.3 for their transport encryption. It's been around for a while. It's the only one that's going to be post-quantum resilient. And so if you're not on 1.3, and a lot of people already just got up to 1.2, it's time to turn around and do that. That's an important thing. But Intuit and other companies, we're all kind of investing in technologies, most of them now based on AI, to better protect the inbound streams to our workforce and even to our customers, to be looking for some of these deepfakes and weeding them out so it never gets to the human. But as Sean mentioned, and you did earlier, they're not perfect yet, these mechanisms. And so we also have to make sure we're putting in technologies to protect when people go to take an action, to remind them, are they really sure? And make them pause. The most important thing we can do for ourselves and for everybody is when you go to take an action from something, and don't trust it necessarily, take a beat, think about whether it could be real or not, and think about a way you could find out if it was real. Call your mother on another line, back to our comment earlier, and make sure it really is her. So do things like that, and that's a lot of training. And we and like all companies are investing in training our workforce for that, and training our customers, because one of the biggest issues for all of us is our customers are getting duped as well. And then they'll do something like change a bank account, or get a loan that they didn't take out. There's all kinds of things that can happen.
Yeah, I think that's why you're seeing such a rise in multi-factor authentication as well. I mean, it feels as if over the past 6 months, from a consumer perspective, that it's happening with virtually every action that you're taking, because for quite some time you would get text messages that looked like it was coming from your bank or from the postal office. And, I kind of intuitively knew I'm not going to take action here unless it's coming from the app itself. But the bad actors are continuing to make it look so much more real that I feel MFA has almost become ubiquitous with how we are signing in and accessing sensitive information.
Yeah, everybody should be using, at a minimum, some kind of second factor, but also thinking about moving to passkeys, which are even more secure, and a better interaction as well.
Yeah. And Sean, it's interesting. And I think I've posed this question to you before. It feels as if we finally wrapped our head around AI, at least consumer facing AI. Is it too late if you haven't started to think about or implement your quantum strategy yet? What's the time frame look like? Is it 5 to 8 years from now? Is it something that could be even sooner than that?
Even sooner. So for example, let's say you are trying to make sure that you're going to put out some kind of policy as a big company like Intuit. You're going to say, okay, guys, every frame is going to have a unique cryptographic hash that's impossible to hack, and we're the only people that know the array or the order of them. And it becomes very simple. You place that inside the viewer. If it doesn't match up at any time, you kind of get the danger Will Robinson notice. So you can do things right now. You can literally go to NIST, start using things like Sphinx Plus and putting that cryptographic hashes inside the actual frame rate of a video or even your voice. And I think that's one key part of it. But don't forget that there's always AI to go against the AI as well, right? And so what you're seeing, a lot of people can start implementing some very simple AI attacks. In other words, you can start using existing AI to map the probability of the distributions of these deepfake activities. So there's some really good things that you can do with kind of good versus bad, and start leveraging concepts like mean field Hamiltonians and real kind of quantum algorithms that can actually work today, and just slow down the rate a little bit while you get your other systems in place. So the good news is the same AI that's going to be a problem can also be used kind of as a defense mechanism.
Right. It feels as if you're always playing 4D chess, right, Sean? Leveraging these different types of technologies, because once we started to understand AI and other predictive technologies, machine learning a little bit better, from a cyber perspective, you're thinking, okay, perhaps it can help us detect our vulnerabilities in a more effective way. We can mitigate in a more effective way. We can respond quicker and more effectively. And it seems as if we're already on to, the next iteration of that. It's moving quite quickly. And then, oh, by the way, there are other compliance and regulatory frameworks that need to be adhered to as well. And it's moving really fast.
No, it is. And you made a really good point there. And half the CISOs out there are going, yep, that makes sense. Because if you look at, if I'm going to initiate some kind of deep fake with a really good video, I'm going to have to get some really interesting scripts or mechanisms or things that you did internal to your company in order to improve the efficacy of my deep fake. So it goes back to the basics right now as well. Make sure all those kinds of things are extremely well network segmented. Make sure that they're cryptographically protected, because at the end of the day, you can't really build a good deep fake unless you're using the human factor of how the actual person who's going to be replicated speaks, the kind of language they use, the kind of techniques or methodologies they follow. So you've got to start protecting even your methods now. So that's a great point, Jill. Great point.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to talk with my hands. So I think that would be one of the first things I would look to if there was, a deepfake Jill walking around. But I want to go back to regulators for a moment here, Atticus, because you had pointed out that it's important that the industry partners are collaborating, and part of that includes regulators. How are they responding? How is the industry working with them to help advance frameworks around this?
Yeah, I think regulators are absolutely trying to respond around the globe, certainly in Europe and here in the US. They're trying. I think the speed of regulation is just slower. And I think one of the things we're seeing is the rapid adoption of AI, and the evolution and the speed of the improvements is outstripping the ability to regulate. That doesn't mean we shouldn't invest in regulation. We shouldn't partner with them. At Intuit, we're partnering with NIST on various standards. Other companies are as well. So I think regulation and consequences to using AI for bad purposes are important, but we can't wait for that. It's going to take too long.
Yeah. And Sean, I want to ask you a question as it relates to financial institutions. And one of the things that struck me in your notes is the ability to manipulate data. And I'm thinking from this perspective from an exchange or a technology provider and so forth, or whether you're a bank or a hedge fund or an asset allocator. There's pretty wide consequences for that. So what should financial institutions be doing now as they're thinking about embracing their quantum strategy?
No, first, I agree with Atticus. Don't wait on the regulators. Do not wait on the regulators. They're nodding their head and scratching their head, and they've got to move an institution that's not used to being that nimble. So I think number one, you got to go to the basics inside. You have to, first of all, really start tightening down your existing cybersecurity defenses. And then you've got to start getting in some really interesting mechanisms on how you start, delivering data, how you store data even more with more efficacy. Because now you have to start with, okay, we now have to start building governance policies around this, because if this gets out, it can be used in a really bad way. So I think in the financial community, they've got a really big because when you think about it, they're the ones that are going to be the targeted the most when they want to get your Aunt Macy's, credit card statement. And they're going to they've got the biggest kind of, I think they got the biggest kind of target on their back right now. And they're really going to have to start figuring out how to change how they interact with their customers and start training their customers a little bit better. And I think that's going to be a key component, is teaching your customers what right looks like and what wrong looks like in the interim while you start implementing some of the concepts we talked about before.
Yeah. Atticus, I'm sorry, go
Well,
ahead.
Jill, I was going to maybe build on something Sean just said and underline it. The importance of having clean data to do good AI has been very clear for a while, but having well-governed data is kind of an emerging area to really be thinking about, and thinking of least access privilege concepts, where your workers have access to the data they need to do their job, but only the data they need, so that if they are social engineered, the blast radius of what could be done is limited. And so that's another thing all companies should be thinking about, is what data is around our enterprise and who has access to it? Do they need access to it? And how do we detect if data is being used in a way we don't expect?
Right. And I'm glad you made that distinction between governance and access. But Atticus, does the workforce have the skill set to be able to execute on these quantum strategies? Because our overarching theme here is the technology is evolving so quick, and there is a finite population that is able to understand the complexities of this. Are companies moving along quick enough to train and reskill to be able to execute in these kinds of environments? I mean, even if you think about it from the academic perspective, are there enough people who are going to be able to protect organizations?
Well, I'm an optimist. I have to be in this job, otherwise it's too hard to do. I do think that we are attempting on the good side to be quick and nimble. We're building out patterns. I think with any new technology, there's always this race of the good versus the bad uses. And so far in humanity's history, the good has stayed far enough ahead of the bad. I still think that's going to happen with AI, and I think it's going to happen with quantum. I think what often happens is as it gets closer and closer, all of a sudden it becomes reality, whatever the trend is. And as we get closer to that, more and more companies, more and more academics will get on board. From the deep fake side and trying to use AI responsibly, I do believe most companies are running at the right speed. But what I worry about, I do think quantum, it's been 10 years away for the last like 20 years. And so, eventually that's not going to be 10 years anymore, and it's going to be here. And I think that's coming sooner than we expect.
Yeah, and Sean, I'll ask the same question for you as well. And it's almost, we don't even think about adapting to certain technologies until it's here. I mean, think about it as, a very rudimentary example, but backup cameras, right? It's ubiquitous. It's in every single car. It's mandatory. It never occurred to you to use something like that, at least when I first got my license. And now I'm not even sure if I can live without it. So it feels as if one day it's not here, then one day it is here, and you have to adapt to it. And I find the way that technology ushers this in at such velocity is really quite fascinating.
No, I want to add on what Atticus said. He said something really compelling that may have gone over most people. He basically talked about, this boom happening, the big bang when you get hacked. Well, when you think about the advent of the fact that right now cybercrime, I think, is about $11 trillion in loss. And now all of a sudden, and those are traditional developers with 16-year-old kids in Moldova. Now they're empowered with deepfake technologies and AI. It's going to be highly asymmetric. So now all of a sudden you're going to have companies that are operating in very similar environments as far as threats concerned that you saw in Afghanistan or that you saw throughout the Middle East in past conflicts. This is now coming home. So I think when you start looking as a chief executive officer, you're really going to have to provide you're going to go back to what we both said so far. You have to go back to the human element. This has become highly asymmetric. And we're already losing the cyber war. It's going to become even worse. So I think the biggest thing that people can do is really start looking at, how do I make sure all the data from the governance and the lineage, where does it come from? How do I make sure I look at the lineage of that data and the governance of that data, and I really put my initial efforts there in using post-quantum cryptography and protect that like yesterday. And then access to it is going to be real important, because it's getting access to that data right now that's going to enable the deep fakes. And you've got to treat that as kind of your new crown jewels in your defense.
All right. Appreciate both of your insights. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.